session is career pathing. So if you go to Slido and type in career pathing, you'll find it, or there's a direct link in the comments portion of the Zoom. We're going to hold questions until the end of the presentation, and any questions we don't get to, our presenters will look at and answer any that need to be answered and post that with the recorded video next week. Our presenters' bios are also in the chat portion of Zoom. Let's make sure I didn't forget anything. I don't think so. So our presenters today are Pratt, who's a senior classifications consultant, Erin Melwing, senior recruitment consultant, and Janelle Brown, also a senior recruitment consultant. With no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Janelle for our presentation.
Okay, well, I think Erin's taking the first one. So do you want to start, Erin?
Yeah, of course. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this October afternoon. We're going to discuss career pathing and how you can take your next steps in your career with ODOT, or even take the next steps in deciding what those steps might be. So my name is Erin Melwing. I'm a senior recruiter, and I'm joined by Janelle and Ann today from our classifications and recruitment teams. And we're going to share some of our best practices, recommendations, and also we want to start that conversation on what career pathing at ODOT can look like. So next slide. There you go. So when you apply at ODOT, it's important to know the types of application materials that a hiring manager has required in order for an application to be considered complete. So each recruitment announcement will detail the specific steps of how to apply, and the required attachments will always be specifically mentioned in the how to apply section of the job announcement. So our job announcements are posted through the Workday system. So whether you're viewing it as an internal employee or an external candidate, you'll see the same job announcement, but how you apply will be slightly different, except the process of attaching in a resume or cover letter or filling out the application. That is the same whether you're a current employee or an external candidate. So for example, a recruitment may only require a completed Workday application or an attached resume. So in these situations, an attached cover letter would not be reviewed because the hiring manager did not require them. So the application is the first thing that a recruiter and a hiring manager will take a look at. This is a great time to make a great first impression. So you want to make sure it's up to date. And you also want to make sure that you're submitting the correct attachments or the information, because we don't want to remove your application from consideration just because it didn't follow instructions. What we're looking for when we review your resume or application at the HR step. So after you apply, the first step is a recruiter is going to take a look at it. And the first thing is we're going to see if it's complete. And we also want to make sure that the materials clearly show the minimum qualifications and the special qualifications. So an example of a special qualification would be a driver's license if driving was essential, like if you needed to travel for the job, or if driving was a main function of that position. So when you're listing that experience on your resume or your application, it does not matter if the position was paid or unpaid. So experience is experience. Be sure to include anything and everything you want the hiring manager and the recruiter to see and know about you. So we cannot ask for additional information. We can only ask for clarifying information. So that is really important when looking at your resume, is if you take a look at it and you go from top to bottom, can you see how you would meet those minimum qualifications? And we encourage you to make sure that you elaborate. We will sometimes put like a cover letter length. So the manager will request like a cover letter no more than 2 pages, but a resume typically does not have a page limit. So we would request anything and everything you'd want us to know about your candidacy. So whether you're actively looking for that next step in your career journey, or if you're more just thinking about it at this time, it's important to keep an up-to-date resume for a few reasons. First reason, you never know when that job opportunity you're interested in is going to come up, and you want to be ready. So second, keeping an up-to-date record of all your job responsibilities, community involvement, certifications, awards, trainings you attended, and more. It's less likely you'll accidentally forget something when you do sit down to write that resume or when you're applying for that position. For myself, it is much easier to remember what I do and what was the official title of that training I attended of the position from 5 years ago, like at a different company. Like it's much harder to recall all that information in the moment. But if you keep track of it as you go, and even if you're not applying for other jobs, at least you have that document and you have that title, and it's much easier to think of. And then if something does pop up, you're ready. And last, having this information, so maybe you're not seeking a new job or you're not looking to apply, having that written record in your resume is a great resource to have when you have a conversation with your manager, either at your performance review, or if you're talking about what you want to do in your role or why you think that you should work on this project. Like it's good to have all that skill set and record ready to go. So an application, so in Workday, again, you can either attach a resume or you can fill out the job history section of your application. We recommend having both ready to go at all times, but it is separate. So they are two separate things. So if you ever are working, or if you're interested in a position and you're not sure if the job history went over when you applied, or if it didn't copy correctly, or if you have any concerns about your attached resume or cover letter, please reach out to the recruiter listed in the job announcement, because they'll be able to tell you, like, yes, you have two documents attached, the PDF titled Erin cover letter.pdf and Erin.resume.final.pdf, or whatever it might be. So we can help you with that. We can't review for content or anything at that time. But what we can do is say, yes, you have your job history section did come over, like this is what we're seeing, or yes, you have the documents attached. So just like your resume, you're going to want your application to be complete as well. Okay, cover letters. So cover letters, if the job announcement requires a cover letter, it's very important to follow the directions in the job announcements. So cover letters instructions are included in the same how to apply section of the job announcement that the hiring manager will also specify if they're looking for a resume or Workday application. So again, the Workday application is the actual job history where you would type in all of your experience in Workday, and the resume would be that attached document. Like, so whether it's a Word doc, a PDF, or another file type that you would attach to the resume in addition to a cover letter or your Workday application. So if you're ever unsure, again, please contact the recruiter. Managers really like candidates that follow directions. And we do too. And also we don't want to remove your application from consideration because it was incomplete. So without that cover letter, we're not able to fully assess your skills and everything that you would bring to the job. And it also didn't follow the instructions. So unfortunately, we would have to remove you from that candidate pool, and that's not what we want to do. So if you ever have questions, please call out, because what we do want to do is answer your questions and be here to help you out. Okay,
thanks, Erin. So what happens next? So you've submitted your documents and through Workday, got your application in, right? So one thing that we're going to do as recruiters is we're going to review your application for content. So we're going to make sure that you meet the qualifications. We're going to look really closely at your work history and anything that you put in there. So you want to be clear about your job duties. We can't assume that you performed a specific duty based on a simple description. So just be detailed and highlight the experience that relates to the qualifications. So we don't want you to over-explain yourself or over-explain a task. We don't need a full PD of your job duties. And also don't include a process or a procedure unless it relates to the job. So a lot of times we'll see applications that literally tell us step by step of what they did, and that's great, but it's not what we need. So we do want specific information, but don't go crazy with it. Recruitment consultants are going to review your application for completion. So we're going to look for MQs. We're going to make sure that you attach any documents that are required, and depending on the documents that we're requiring per the announcement, if you don't attach it, we're not going to accept it. If you are asked to address specific topics or answer some questions and you don't do that, we're not going to accept it. So in some instances, recruiters will actually review cover letters for content. So just be aware of that. And if for some reason we don't review for content, once the hiring manager gets it, they won't look at it. So be sure that you follow the directions per the job posting and get everything addressed as required. If it specifically says to number your responses, number your responses. So the following directions is very, very important to getting further in the application process. Okay, so I think we're still on this one. If your application is not accepted or doesn't move forward in the process, you can contact the recruitment consultant and find out why. So we will send you an email. Typically, you'll get one that's system generated, doesn't give you a lot of information. And so if you do get that, just be sure that you respond. We will tell you what's wrong with your application, why it's not moving forward, and you can also request a review. So if one recruiter doesn't pass your application through for one reason or another, when that recruiter gets your response, they'll send it to a senior recruiter for review. So another recruiter will review it, and then we'll decide, yes, they were correct, or no, that we'll give it another look and we'll push it through. So just be aware that that is an option for you. Okay, next slide. Okay, manager screening. So managers or screeners will review content beyond the MQs. So a lot of times managers will have panels of screeners, and sometimes they'll just do it by themselves. We usually don't know, sometimes we do, but if it's a panel, they're gonna look at everything together. They're gonna put their scores into an evaluation matrix and it'll calculate everything out for us. They're gonna look at your materials and content as it relates to the desired attributes or questions that they're asking for in the job posting. So you wanna make sure, again, that your cover letter addresses everything it needs to, or your resume includes everything that the posting requires. If they're not seeing what they need to see, they won't invite you to interview. So this is the information that they're going to use to decide who moves forward in the process. Screeners are also going to look at how you present your materials. So they may or may not take that into consideration, but a lot of times they do. So if your application has different fonts in it, or your cover letter has different fonts, different font sizes, or if it's not formatted right, or it's kind of a mess, they're going to look at that because it's not putting your best work forward. So that could be another thing that might not get you the interview. Next slide. Okay, so the interviewing phase, you've gotten this far, great. So there are options, and more options now than there were 9 months ago. So pre-recorded interviews are common. We have a contract with a company called VidCruiter. Recruiters will set up the interviews through the system. And basically what it is you read text questions and you respond on a video recording. There are benefits, pros and cons to doing it that way. You don't get feedback from anybody. No one asks you follow-up questions. So there isn't any of that. You're usually held to a time limit for answering the questions, but you may also have prep time as well. So keep that in mind if that's what the direction that the manager decides to go. For phone interviews, they're less common, but they work really well for entry-level positions or high volume recruitments. We don't use a lot of that. More of the phone interview stuff happens for DMV. They do a lot because they have a ton of entry-level positions and high applicant pools. So sometimes they'll do phone interviews to kind of help screen the list down. Face-to-face, virtual interviews, we all know how great those are now. There is opportunity for feedback in those types of interviews, just like there is for in-person interviews. Okay, next slide. So do's and don'ts of interviewing. This is not a very fun subject, but everybody needs to know this stuff. So dressing appropriately it seems like a no-brainer, but you would be surprised. please don't wear a hoodie or a baseball cap to your interview, even if it's a virtual interview. We recommend business attire, pressed shirts, ties, nice sweaters, blouses, etc. But it might also depend on the job that you're interviewing for. So obviously someone in the director's office isn't going to dress the same as someone who's interviewing for a maintenance position. And we're not saying that maintenance is, you know, by any means less important, but that's just a different format. It's a different level of work. It's just different. So just keep that in mind, whatever you're applying for, and the interviews, you know, just dress appropriately for the job. Please show up on time. If you have a virtual interview, be sure you test your equipment. Check the software that they're using and make sure that works. Check your internet bandwidth, make sure that it's not choppy, that it's smooth and they can hear you and you can hear them really, and there's no like pixelating and pausing and stuff like that. If you run into like technical difficulties, please call the hiring manager or the admin support that set the interviews up. They may be able to accommodate you in a different way, maybe give you a different format to use. You just want to make sure that you get all the bugs worked out before the time starts. And let's see, reference checks. You need to bring your reference check form with you to your interview. And if it's a virtual one, a lot of times they'll ask you to email it. But that way that if you're, you know, in the running or if you're the top candidate, they can grab that and just run with it as soon as possible. Next slide. So the don'ts. No call, no show. We all know that things come up at the last minute. Emergencies happen, we get it. But please call the admin support that set up the interviews, call the hiring manager, leave a message, let them know that you can't attend, and they might be able to accommodate you in a different way. So they may be able to set up a different time or day for you. They might be able to set up a phone versus an interview or a video. Or if it's an in-person interview, they might be able to set something else up like virtual. So please call. It kind of leaves a bad taste in the manager's mouth when you just don't show up and don't tell anybody what's happening. And don't be unprofessional. You want to be a superstar in the interview so that you can get that offer, right? So don't be that person that you're not. So the manager will expect you to be the same person when you report to work on your first day in that job. So don't be fake. Be you. Be professional. Don't put on a show that when you come in the first day, the manager's like, oh my gosh, what did I do? So just be yourself and everything will be fine. Next slide. Another big one is the references. You know, you're going to provide your reference release form to the panel or whoever's taking them before the interviews. It's a good idea to let your references know that they may be contacted so that they can be prepared. If you catch them off guard, they might have different responses, especially if the reference is your current manager and they don't know you're looking for another job. Some managers get a little upset about that. So just be upfront with your managers and any of your other references that you're using. Keep in mind that someone might contact you for additional references if they don't get responses from the ones that you put on your reference release form. This is another reason why giving your references a heads up is a good idea. You want them to be aware of what's going on, and if they're not available, maybe they can, you can get somebody else in their spot. Maybe they're going to be out of the country and you're not going to be able to get a hold of them. So having extra references is always a good idea. Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So congratulations, you got the job. That's awesome. Enjoy your new role and all the exciting learning opportunities that the new role will offer. So that's always really exciting when you get a new job, because I don't know, I always think of it like back to when you like had your first day of school. I usually wear like a new outfit and like all the fun stuff. And so we want you to enjoy that feeling. We want you to be prepared. But we want you to start asking yourself some questions. So for example, what are your career goals? Where do you see yourself in 6 months, a year, 5 years, at retirement? What about? And so if you're in your optimal role and you're interested more in further development within that role, that's where we recommend that you partner with your manager to have those conversations for training managers. So if you want to continue down a path in your field or switch careers, think about where you want to go next. So if you're an associate in engineering 1, do you want to be an associate in engineering 2 someday, or a professional engineer 1 to a principal executive manager? So think about where you want to go. But what if you're in an associate in engineering role, but then you decide you want to be an operations and policy analyst? So what are the steps you need to do in order to get to that role, because you're switching job classifications? So first things first, you're not alone in your career journey. So reach out to your manager to discuss your goals. If you're thinking about changing fields, a good thing to do is schedule an informational interview with someone that's in that field. So whether it be a supervisor of a unit that you'd like to work in someday, or maybe the team lead of that unit, or an employee that you think does a really cool job and you'd like to learn more about doing that cool job so you could do the cool job someday. There's all kinds of options, but the first thing starts with knowing yourself, and you know you best. So that's where we encourage you to have those conversations with your managers and to have those conversations with people that are in those roles so that you can find out more and if that's the path you'd like to take. We have a new website. It's called Explore ODOT. It is on the internet. And so you can actually check out all the careers. It's a great page. They broke it down into different sections. But there's also a manage your career section at the bottom. And I encourage everyone to take that next step and take a look at that website. And this is something that you can start doing as early as this afternoon. And so on that website, you're going to see things like how to find a mentor, make a training plan, do a rotation, job shadow, request informational interviews, and more. And with that information, then you may be able to start thinking of how you would respond to some of those questions you asked yourself. And at the beginning of the slide, I know I said, congratulations, you got this new job, but it can also be the job you're currently in. So ask yourself those questions and then check out that website. And I put the link here in the slideshow as well. But if you also type in, like on our Oregon DOT website, you can find it under Explore ODOT. And I encourage you all to check it out and see what you find. And if you have any questions or anything about anything you see on that page, please reach out to us. We'd love to answer your questions and help you explore ODOT.
Okay, we're on the next slide, and that's me. I'm Erin Pratt, and I work in classification. So not quite in recruitment. I'm more about the current jobs that people have. But we're going to talk a little bit about developing skills and kind of how to get to the next level. So transferable skills are literally skills that are portable. You can take them from one job to another job, and they're not so much about that specific type of work, but things like research and analytical skills, or verbal and written communication skills, adaptability, things like that, that you may have learned in one job, whatever that actual job was, that you can take to use somewhere else or in an entirely different career. So think about ways that your current job has helped you develop those types of transferable skills, and you can highlight those on an application should you be applying for a promotion. So your previous job title might not have been project manager, but if you had, if you were assigned work where you had to coordinate a task and maybe lead a team, monitor the progress or the cost of it, and make sure that it was done correctly, that's experience that's relevant and useful if you're wanting to apply to a project manager job, for instance. Next slide. So some in-house ways, we have a few in-house ways that you can learn about other jobs or expand your own skills. And one of the things actually that I like the most about my job is that I get to learn about all the other jobs in the agency. And so that's what we do in classification. And there's ways that just anyone in the agency can go and maybe job shadow. And that's basically where you just follow somebody around for the day or 2 days with your manager's permission. You can go and watch what that person does and see what a typical day looks like for them in that job. And if it's something that you're interested in, that might help you kind of make a decision about what types of training and experience that you need to get to someday have that job. Job rotations and developmental opportunities are similar but slightly different. A developmental opportunity is where you go and perform a different body of work from your actual job, and it's a temporary assignment with your manager's approval again, but you don't have the knowledge and the skills that you need to do that job independently. So if I was going to go on a developmental to learn how to be a surveyor, like I don't have any of those, the knowledge or the skills that I need to do that job. And so someone would need to keep a very close eye on my work and make sure that I'm not messing anything up. And it would probably take a good long time for me to learn that job. So that's kind of what a developmental is for. You're learning the skills necessary to be able to do that job, and you're getting the experience. But it's kind of when it's a completely new job, and it's the point of it is to develop your skills. A job rotation, on the other hand, is where you probably have most of the skills needed to do that other body of work, but you might just need to learn that actual job. And so there may be some training, but for the most part, once you're trained, you can pretty much do the job independently. And that is, it may come with work out of class or something like that. And again, that's with your manager's position or permission. You may apply for that type of thing. So a developmental and a job rotation, we do sometimes put announcements out for those. Or you may be invited to do that by someone if there's a manager that has extra work and needs some help and or knows that you're interested in a particular career and wants to help you learn how to do it. Those things can be done by invitation or by kind of a recruitment type process. And again, that requires your manager's permission, and it's kind of up to the employee and the manager to decide how long the duration is and things like that. But that's a good way. Developmentals and rotations are a great way to learn new skills and get experience. For kind of lastly, I'm just going to touch on training. So we have a lot of different, in the state of Oregon in general, and then also in ODOT, we have a lot of different types of training that are out there. And so there are programs for management, project management, leadership, all kinds of things. So I would encourage everyone to go check out the ODOT HR intranet page. There's a employee development heading that has things about training. There's also great resources there. There's a link that goes out to the website that Erin was talking about to kind of show you how to take the next step in your career, those kinds of things. So there's good resources there to get access to training. Next slide. So one of the things I kind of want to finish up on is the classification progression. So understanding how classifications are, are leveled and what the differences are between the levels. There's, like I mentioned, project manager, there's project manager 1, 2, 3. A lot of different classifications have multiple levels. And so there are differences in the type of experience that you need or the amount, usually the amount of experience that you need to get from one level to the next. The link that's on this slide goes out to the statewide classification specifications. Thank you, Erin. And that is basically just descriptions. There's an alphabetical listing there. You can look up a job by the title. So you can go out to P for project manager, and you can see the class specs, what we call them, the description of that type of classification, the different types of work that it might do, the minimum qualifications in order to qualify for that type of job, and the salary ranges are also out there. And those will also tell you the types of knowledge and skills that a person would need to be in that classification. And there's one piece in there that's called the distinguishing features, and that is something that's important to kind of tell the difference between a 1 and a 2, or a 1 and a 2 and a 3. So there are some details just in a paragraph called distinguishing features that will usually kind of tell you why something is a 1 versus a 2. And that's another thing that's sometimes helpful to know. And then kind of lastly, I just want to say that kind of understanding those things is, it's important to know how the steps, you know, in the staircase work, so that you know if you're at the first step, how you get to the second one and the third one and so on. And so the class descriptions will really help you understand how the staircase works and how to get from here to there. And with that, I think we're going to move on to questions.
There are a couple of questions. The first one is, are all positions required to be posted and open to candidates, or can you find a position you want and ask for a rotation?
Who's going to take that? I can take that one. So managers have a lot of options. If they're going to look at a lot of candidates, they can post the job. But if you're interested in a rotation, talk to people. Like, talk to the manager that you're interested in working for. Talk to other folks who work for that manager. And sometimes, you know, it just depends. A lot of it has to do with contract language. So some job rotations can just be assigned by a manager. They can just assign it to someone, or they can, you know, ask for competition basically, and you'd have to compete for it. So if it's for a permanent position, 90% of the time they have to be posted in one way or another. They don't have to be open competitive. They can be internally, they can be transfers only and stuff like that. So, but for rotations, there's a lot more flexibility. So they can go through Workday. They don't have to go through Workday. They can post it. They don't have to post it. So that type of stuff is really flexible with rotations.
All right. Next question. If I apply for a job, does my current manager get notified through Workday? How can we keep our application private?
So no, it does not notify your manager. Our recommendation would be to let your manager know when you feel comfortable to let them know. For me personally, what I've done in the past is I schedule a time to talk with my manager so I can make sure there's no interruptions, and I can explain why I sought out that opportunity. So maybe it's a project I really wanted to work on or something, but just to have that conversation. And because they may be contacted as a reference. And so I don't want them to be surprised. So that's how I personally handled it was, hey, I'm going to apply for this. Here's why. You know, it gives me this opportunity. This is part of my larger career goal. And then also for the private part, like if they, a manager only has access to see certain things in Workday, and it's usually within their organizational structure. So if they wanted to see things outside of that, they would either need to contact someone in HR and say, I'm trying to find this information out, and they would have to put in a request through like our reports team. But as far as a job application, We wouldn't share that information unless they were the hiring manager or needed to know. We'd ask a lot of questions before we released anything type of that. But the answer in that situation will probably be no. We can't tell you who that is. But that's where we encourage you to have that conversation because we won't be telling them. So we hope that you will, so they're not surprised if they're referenced.
Great. Should we list all of our experience on a resume or cut it off at 10 years?
Well, there used to be this rule, unspoken rule, unwritten rule about don't go past 10 years. But to be honest with you, if you're applying for a state job, we look at everything. So if it's relevant, put it in there. I don't care if it was 30 years ago. If it applies to what you're interested in, then we want to see that. So, you can tailor your resume and your application to whatever you're applying for. So if it's an engineering position, you don't want to put food services in there. So that type of thing. So you can tailor it to the way you want. But we will look at everything and we will count everything that qualifies. So put it in there.
And remember that some of those transferable skills might have been a long time ago, but you might have learned something, 20 years ago that would be relevant to a job you're applying for today.
Not all managers are so open-minded. If I say, no, you cannot contact my current manager, will that reflect poorly on me?
So we explain that we ask for the references and you may be contacted if they need to request more references. So if you don't list a current supervisor or if you don't list any supervisors, the hiring manager may call you and say that they need a supervisor reference in order to move forward with you as a candidate. We would still check back in because we don't have everything we need. It depends on the role. There's a couple of factors that they would look at, so if there's no supervisory history, they may want the perspective from a supervisor, and that's when they would make that call to you.
A few more questions. For the interview, are interview questions presented in written form ahead of the meeting to the candidates?
That's up to the hiring manager, how they want that done. We're a little out of the norm. In the private sector, typically they don't let you know what the questions are ahead of time. Whereas with the state, we generally do, but they don't have to be presented beforehand. So just keep that in mind. You may or may not see them before the interview. So they're not required to do it. They're not required to show them to you. They're not required to not show them to you. So it's just personal preference on the behalf of the manager.
And something you can do, because that can be really overwhelming. It's exciting to get interviewed, but also I know it's what are they going to ask? What if I don't have an answer? I don't want to say nothing, so something that I would recommend is kind of looking at the position and anticipating. So what kind of question is it going to ask? If it's doing project management, maybe pull out a couple, 2 or 3 examples of times that you really excelled in project management. So whatever your experience or your education related to that is, so that if you do have the questions beforehand, or if you're asked a question on the spot, you have an example you can readily share. So that's something that I would recommend. And then just kind of looking at the position description or the desired attributes, so you can kind of anticipate and think okay, they probably will ask something like this. And if they don't, you were ready anyways. So maybe another time.
Thank you. Can you use your manager as a reference if they are the hiring manager?
You want me to take that one?
Sure.
Like any of us really could take that question. We can act as our own reference. So if the hiring manager is your manager, they can provide a reference, on behalf of you. So, or for yourself. So it's really kind of one of those weird things. But I guess yes, you could. But your manager knows you best, right? So you know, obviously they're going to be honest and recommending you for their position or not. So.
All right. If you have worked on gaining experience, training, and education, and now meet the requirements of the third step in a 3-level job series, how do you move up?
You would need to apply for a vacancy. So for each position, unless you were in an underfill situation, so if you're in an underfill situation, you would know when you had applied for that first job. So for example, if there was an engineering specialist 2 and you were underfilling for 6 months as an engineering specialist 1, that would have been included in the job announcement and you would have signed an underfill agreement, so you would know. But if you're not in that situation, you would need to actively set up either a job filter, which is what I recommend, so they'll email you automatically when the jobs get posted. I would find ways to stay connected with recruitment. So whether it's reading the ODOT weekly emails that we send out on Mondays, but I would be looking for that next step and then setting up internal filters on the Workday site to automatically email me when those third level positions pop up.
And this is the last question I have so far. If we put a link to our LinkedIn page, do they look at it?
Like on the resume, I'm guessing.
That's what I'm
going to answer it like that, if not to send it another little chat. We would look at it, we would look at the document, we would see that a link, we would not recommend that they click that link because it's actually going off of the document that we requested. To my knowledge, no managers have requested LinkedIn pages. They don't look at your social media as part of our process. So including the link, we would see it and say, okay, you have a LinkedIn, but we are only going to review what's on the paper. So if you really spend a lot of time filling out your LinkedIn profile with all of your experience, your education, I recommend including anything from that page that you would want the panel to review to put on that document.
All right, I don't have any other questions. None are popping in. If there's nothing else, I believe we're done. And I thank you for presenting and your time and all the good information you shared with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. It was good to see you.
You too.
Bye.
Miss you. Bye.
Thank you.